Hello, I'm Dr. Hope Ferdowsian, and I'm going to talk about a Belmont Report for animals. Last year commemorated the 40th anniversary of the Belmont Report. As a foundational document in research ethics, the Belmont Report establishes the principles to which human research should adhere: respect for persons, which is generally articulated as respect for autonomy, obligations to beneficence and justice, and special protections for vulnerable individuals and populations. These principles provide a basis for operational requirements, namely informed consent, assessment of risk and benefits, and the selection of subjects in research. Drawing on the work of the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, which authored the Belmont Report, many federal agencies and private and public institutions in the U.S. have adopted a uniform set of regulations known as the Common Rule, which offers specific protections for children, incarcerated individuals, and pregnant women and their fetuses. These populations are considered vulnerable. The development and publication of the Belmont Report followed concerns about human research, including those highlighted in the Nuremberg Trials following the Second World War. Here, of course, is a photo of the Nuremberg Trials, with Nazi war criminals on trial for experimenting on human beings who were held prisoner, tortured, and often killed. The Nuremberg Trials also led to the publication of the Nuremberg Code in 1947 and the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964, both of which overlap with the Belmont Report, though they are more prescriptive and less focused on ethical principles. In 1966, Henry Beecher, an anesthesiologist and researcher, also described ethical problems with human research. Beecher's New England Journal of Medicine paper, Ethics in Clinical Research, revealed that human research was frequently conducted with insufficient attention to informed consent, risk to participants, or sound ethical justification. By 1972, news reports also raised concerns about the 40-year-long U.S. Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee. Researchers did not obtain informed consent from the African American men targeted for inclusion in the study, and the men were not notified of the availability of penicillin when it became the established, effective treatment regimen for syphilis in 1947. Subsequently, public concerns about unethical research practices grew. By 1974, the U.S. Congress authorized the establishment of the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, and 4 years later, the commission, which was composed of researchers, philosophers, and public representatives, produced the Belmont Report. Although there have been significant advances in human research, unscrupulous practices continue. These practices target particularly vulnerable populations, including children, people living in economically impoverished areas, those who are unhoused, and individuals with cognitive or psychiatric differences. These problems are in many ways related to the moral problems with animal research. Today, some of the most problematic research practices involve animals. Millions of animals, including dogs, cats, non-human primates, and many other species of small and large animals, are used in research each year. To date, no document regarding animal research has approximated the scope and influence of the Belmont Report, despite advancements in our understanding of animals' emotional and intellectual capacities. In 2015, former primate researcher, now ethicist, Dr. John Gluck and I wrote about how animal research is plagued by many moral problems analogous to those Henry Beecher described, that is, issues related to consent, harm, and lack of benefit to the individual. The same year Henry Beecher published his groundbreaking article in the New England Journal of Medicine, the U.S. Congress passed the Animal Welfare Act. The passage of the Animal Welfare Act followed the publication of an influential Life magazine article entitled Concentration Camps for Dogs, showing starving, chained, and dead dogs at a breeding farm for animals used in experimentation. However, the U.S. Animal Welfare Act and subsequent laws and policies governing animal research, like many laws and policies around the world, have done relatively little to address ethical or moral problems with research involving non-human animals. Though the original intent of the U.S. Animal Welfare Act was to prevent the unauthorized acquisition of some dogs and cats for research purposes, subsequent amendments have expanded or restricted the scope of the act. In 2002, the majority of animals used in research, birds, rats, mice, fish, and farmed animals, were specifically excluded from the act, largely because of the lobbying efforts of industries that profit from their use. There is still a patchwork process in place to oversee decisions about the use of animals in research. Currently, researchers, reviewers, and oversight bodies rely on a combination of international and national guidance and the 3 R's framework first proposed by William Russell and Rex Birch in 1959. The 3 R's framework emphasizes replacement of, quote, sentient animals with non-animal research methods, or so-called less sentient animals, a reduction in the numbers of animals used in particular experiments, and refinement of experimental techniques to reduce stress or distress. The 3 R's framework still does not reflect a set of principles by which to judge the ethical permissibility of proposed research conduct. The 3 R's framework assumes the necessity of animal research, reflecting the problematic science-first attitude outlined by Russell and Birch, as well as a general presumption that when in conflict, human interest outweigh animal interest. Meanwhile, worldwide, the number of animals used in experiments each year has climbed to upwards of 100 million over the course of less than a century. Here are the top 10 animal-using countries. What if we were to apply the Belmont Report to other animals? How could the situation for non-human animals change? Within the Belmont Report, respect for persons incorporates 2 separate but related moral requirements: to respect autonomy and to protect those with diminished autonomy. Autonomy refers to the capacity for self-determination. It's a capacity for self-rule and an ability to protect or further one's own interest. As a result, it is intimately tied to vulnerability. Subjects with compromised autonomy lack the ability to adequately represent their own interest, which makes them vulnerable to exploitation and harm. It's now generally accepted that many animals, like humans, display autonomy or autonomous action. In humans and other animals, the capacity for self-determination can change over a lifetime as a result of neurological, psychological, and emotional maturation or degeneration, or other changes in aptitude. Think of a very small child or an adult who might be living with dementia. Regardless of impairments in autonomy, self-determination, in whatever form it takes, is essential to well-being in humans and other animals. Though it's important to respect autonomy, it is as important to protect those with diminished autonomy, whether that's due to factors that are intrinsic or extrinsic to the individual. In such cases, 2 general rules apply. To the degree they're able, even individuals with compromised autonomy should be provided opportunities to choose what will or will not happen to them. To the degree that individuals are incapable of making informed decisions, they should be protected from harm. If applied to animals, these rules would suggest that non-human animals should be respected for their varying capacities for self-determination, but that they should also be protected from harm and exploitation when they cannot make informed and voluntary decisions about their lives. Another principle outlined in the Belmont Report is beneficence. Beneficence is often taken to mean doing good, but in the Belmont Report, the principle is based on 2 general rules: do no harm, a principle that is also embodied in the Hippocratic Oath, and maximize possible benefits while minimizing possible harms. These rules, interpreted literally, would be in tension, since there's a difference between not harming and merely minimizing harm. However, in human research, the principle of beneficence is operationalized through a requirement that possible risks to participants are minimized and that there is a favorable benefit-risk ratio for participants. The situation concerning animals is quite different. In the majority of national and international documents that provide guidance on animal experimentation, including the 3 R's, the main justification advanced for animal experimentation is the benefit of medical advances for human welfare. Benefits to humans, and even the scientific question itself, are weighed much more heavily than harms to non-human animals. The risk of harm to animals is high to certain in most research. Whereas in humans we consider a full nature and scope of physical, psychological, social, and other harms, that is far less common in animal research. If considered, risk associated with animal research would include harms associated with captivity, trafficking, a lack of safety and security, physical, emotional, social, sensory, and cognitive deprivation, deprivation of the ability to live a full, self-determined, and normal life, the infliction of pain, disease, and discomfort, forced sex and coercive reproduction, witnessing harm to other animals, and being killed. As a result, animals used in research are subjected to lifetimes of physical and psychological suffering. Non-human animals experience the same types of nociceptive and neuropathic pain that humans do, and we now have an abundant amount of evidence that when deprived of freedom, safety, choice, love, and normal social bonds, animals can experience mental disorders like anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, and post-traumatic stress. In human and non-human beings, trauma is mediated by neuroendocrine markers. With severe acute or chronic stress, cortisol and other factors can have toxic effects on brain structures and multiple other organs and systems in the body: the heart and vascular system, the endocrine system, the immune system, the musculoskeletal system, and others. These changes also reduce the validity and reliability of animal experimentation. In human medicine, we acknowledge the cumulative effects of trauma starting from childhood. We now know the same is true for non-human animals. Animals are no less capable of suffering than humans are, and perhaps they suffer more as a result of an inability to understand what is happening to them and an inability to control their fates within the context of research. These critical facts bring us to the question of justice. The question of justice posed by the Belmont Report is, who ought to receive the benefits of research and bear its burdens? Justice was a driving force behind the Belmont Report and determinations about the selection of subjects for research. In fact, the Belmont Report states, quote, "It can be considered a matter of social justice that there is an order of preference in the selection of classes of subjects, for example, adults before children, and that some classes of potential subjects, for example, the institutionalized mentally infirm or prisoners, may be involved as research subjects, if at all, only on certain conditions. I interpret that to mean that I, as a medical doctor with certain privileges, should be recruited for research before a child would be, before a prisoner would be, and before a non-human animal would be. Generally, individuals, especially those with impaired autonomy, should not be subjected to risks disproportionate to the benefits of the research. And if individuals are members of groups unlikely to benefit from the research, such individuals may need to be excluded from research altogether. Currently, animals are deliberately and commonly chosen for research as a result of their easy availability, as a result of institutional and cultural biases in society. Like human populations who have been historically and systematically targeted, animals also have a frequently compromised capacity for free consent. Though vulnerable human populations, including children and prisoners, are protected as a result of their compromised abilities to provide informed consent, animals are currently excluded from similar protections, despite possessing similar vulnerabilities. Animals overwhelmingly bear the burdens of research without accessing the benefits, which by any true measure of justice would be considered unjust. Ultimately, we are left with a central question: whether we as humans, individually and collectively, have a right to use and harm other sentient beings who cannot, do not, or would not consent. In a paper in the January 2020 issue of Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics, my co-authors and I describe a way forward with a Belmont Report for animals, one that would benefit humans and non-human animals and advance ethics, science, and medicine. Thank you. Please reach out if you're interested in talking further about efforts to advance the Belmont Report for animals.